They took
And
my
that's when
hearing
I
aids,
realized
my phone,
sometimes the
and my
most
wallet,
unexpected
so I
moments
couldn't
hold
call
the
for help.
greatest
That was
lessons.
the first thing
It
I
changed
understood
everything for
when I
me.
reached into my cardigan pocket and found nothing but an old tissue and a butterscotch candy. At 74, I've learned not to panic easily, but that moment, standing in an unfamiliar kitchen with the ocean roaring somewhere beyond the walls, felt like someone had quietly erased me from my own life and walked away whistling. I pressed my palm against the cold countertop, trying to steady myself. Without my hearing aids, the world had gone muffled, distant, like listening through thick wool. I could feel vibrations in the floor, the dull thud of waves against the shore, but voices had become ghosts. Sounds I'd relied on for decades were suddenly stolen from me. It had happened somewhere between the moment my son Thomas hugged me at my front door and the moment I stepped out of his car 20 minutes later at this beach house I'd never seen before. He'd been so convincing. "Mom, we found something at the old storage unit, some of Dad's things. You should come see them before we donate everything." His voice had been soft, concerned, the voice he used to use when he was a boy asking for help with homework. I should have known better. Harold had been gone for 3 years now. We'd cleaned out everything together, Thomas and I, in those raw weeks after the funeral. There was no storage unit. There were no forgotten boxes. But grief makes you foolish sometimes. It makes you want to believe that pieces of the person you lost might still be waiting somewhere, tucked away in a corner you hadn't checked. So I went with him. I got in the car with my own son, and I let him drive me to this place. The beach house was small, weathered gray by salt air, perched on a stretch of rocky coastline I didn't recognize. Thomas's wife Linda had been waiting inside when we arrived. She smiled that thin smile she always wore, the one that never quite reached her eyes. "We thought you'd enjoy a few days by the ocean," she said. The words reached me faintly, distorted. "You've
I
been
never
so
thought I'd be here
stressed
telling you
lately.
this,
This
but
will be good for
sometimes
you."
life just surprises
Stressed.
you. And
That was their
honestly,
favorite
it's
word
the
for me
best
now.
surprise I could ask
Every
for.
time I questioned a bank statement, they'd asked me to sign. Every time I noticed mail had been opened before I saw it. Every time I asked why Thomas needed another loan against the house Harold and I had paid off 30 years ago. "Mom, you're stressed. Mom, you're confused. Mom, let us handle it." I wasn't confused. I was paying attention, and that, I was beginning to understand, was exactly the problem. The moment they left me alone in that beach house, I reached for my hearing aids. Gone. I checked my pockets. Phone gone. Wallet gone. Even my glasses case had been emptied, though at least they'd left the glasses themselves. Small mercies from people who needed me alive enough to sign papers. I walked through the house slowly, my bare feet silent on the wooden floors. The front door was locked with a deadbolt I didn't have a key for. The windows were the old kind, painted shut years ago, sealed by layer after layer of ocean humidity. The back door led to a small deck overlooking the water, but it was padlocked from the outside. I could see the chain through the glass, thick and new, catching the afternoon light. They had planned this, not yesterday, not last week. This had been building for months, maybe longer. All those visits where Thomas wandered into my study, all those times Linda offered to help sort my mail, all those concerned conversations about whether I should still be living alone. I sank into the nearest chair, a wicker thing that creaked under my weight. The silence pressed against my ears like a physical thing. I could feel my heartbeat in my throat, heavy and too fast. But somewhere beneath the fear, something else stirred. A stubbornness I'd carried my whole life. The same stubbornness that had gotten me through raising 3 children while teaching 5th grade. Through Harold's first heart attack, through his second one that he didn't survive. I pressed my hands together until they stopped shaking. Harold would have hated this. He would have hated seeing me trapped, voiceless, waiting for someone else to decide my future. He was the one who'd insisted on preparing for everything. Backup plans for backup plans. Redundancy saves lives, he used to say. One system fails, another takes over. And then I remembered. My hand moved instinctively to my throat, touching the silver pendant that hung there. Harold had given it to me for our 40th anniversary. A simple oval locket, nothing flashy, exactly my style. But Harold being Harold, he hadn't just given me jewelry, he'd given me insurance. Inside this locket, he told me once, showing me the tiny mechanism, is a panic button. You press it twice, hold for 3 seconds, and it sends a signal, GPS location, emergency alert, straight to a monitoring service. They'll call the house first. If no one answers, they dispatch police. I'd laughed at him then. Harold, I'm not a secret agent. But he'd just shrugged. That patient way he had. You never know, Ellie. You never know what might happen when I'm not around. I hadn't thought about that conversation in years. The locket had become just jewelry, something I wore because it reminded me of him, because it still smelled faintly of his cologne when I held it close. Now my fingers trembled as I pressed the tiny catch on the side. The pendant opened, revealing the small button Harold had installed. A button Thomas and Linda knew nothing about, but I didn't press it yet. I needed to think. If I triggered the alert now, Thomas would simply explain it away. His mother is confused, he'd say. She gets anxious, wanders off, presses things she doesn't understand. They'd bring me back home, and next time they'd be more careful. Next time they'd take the locket too. No, I needed to wait until I had proof, until I had witnesses, until the situation was clear enough that no amount of concerned son performance could explain it away. I closed the locket and let it rest against my chest. The first night, I explored every inch of that beach house. My fingers learned the texture of each wall, each door frame, each window latch. The floorboards creaked in specific places. The kitchen had a drawer full of mismatched utensils, but nothing sharp. The bedroom held a thin mattress and a blanket that smelled of mothballs. And in the small closet by the back door, I found something they'd overlooked. An old kayak paddle, dusty and cracked but solid. And behind it, wedged into the corner like it had been forgotten decades ago, a coiled rope. I couldn't paddle without a kayak, but I tucked these discoveries into my memory like coins in a pocket. Every small advantage mattered now. Morning came gray and cold. I watched through the window as Thomas's car pulled up the gravel drive. He came inside with a paper bag, the kind from a fast food restaurant, and set it on the table. I couldn't hear what he was saying, but I could read his lips well enough. "Brought you breakfast, Mom. How did you sleep?" I didn't answer. I just watched him. His expression flickered, something between annoyance and uncertainty. He pulled out papers from his jacket pocket, the same papers I'd seen glimpses of before. Power of attorney, property transfer, medical proxy. He spread them on the table like a hand of cards he expected to win. I couldn't hear his explanation, but I knew what he was saying. It's for your own good. You can't manage everything alone anymore. Just sign, and we'll take care of everything. I looked at the papers, then at my son, the boy I'd held as an infant, the teenager who'd cried in my arms when his first girlfriend broke up with him, the man who delivered the eulogy at his father's funeral with tears streaming down his face. How did we get here? I pushed the papers back toward him without touching a pen. His face reddened. Linda appeared in the doorway, arms crossed, watching. They stayed for an hour, arguing with me, at me, around me. I caught fragments of words through the muffled silence. Stubborn, ungrateful, don't understand, need help. I sat perfectly still, hands folded, giving them nothing. Finally, Thomas gathered the unsigned
Welcome to my
papers
studio.
and stormed
Today,
out.
I want to share a
Linda
story
lingered
about a
for a
journey
moment,
that changed
that
everything
thin
for me.
smile appearing
It began
again.
with a single step into the unknown.
"We'll try again tomorrow," she said slowly, making sure I could read her lips. "When you've had time to think about what's best." The door slammed. The car pulled away. And I was alone again, with the ocean and my plans. That night, I made my move. The back door was padlocked, but the door itself was old. The frame was soft from years of salt air and neglect. I took the kayak paddle and wedged it into the gap between the door and the frame, right where the lock met the wood. Leverage, Harold had taught me, is about finding the weak point and applying steady pressure. It took an hour. My arms screamed, my shoulders burned. But finally, with a groan of splintering wood, the frame gave way just enough to create a gap. Not enough to walk through, but enough to squeeze. I grabbed the rope, tied one end to a solid pipe under the sink, and threaded it through the gap to give myself something to hold on to on the other side. Then I turned sideways and pushed myself through. The wood scraped my arms, my ribs. Something tore in my sleeve, but I was outside. The ocean air hit my face like a blessing. For a moment, I just stood there on the deck, breathing, letting the salt wind fill my lungs. The moon was half hidden behind clouds, but there was enough light to see the rocky path leading down to the water. I knew where I was now. The coastline curved distinctively, a shape I recognized from drives Harold and I had taken years ago. We were about 20 minutes from my house by car, but by water, following the shoreline, it was closer, maybe a mile, maybe less. And there, tied to a small dock I hadn't been able to see from inside, was a kayak, old, faded orange, probably left by whoever owned this place before Thomas rented it. But it floated. That was all that mattered. I climbed down the rocks carefully. My knees protested every step. My balance wasn't what it used to be, especially without sounds to orient me. But I reached the dock. I reached the kayak. I lowered myself into it with a prayer on my lips and pushed off into the dark water. The paddle was heavy in my hands, but the motion came back to me. Stroke, pull, switch. Harold and I had kayaked together in our 50s, back when weekends still felt infinite. My muscles remembered even if my bones complained. The water was calm. The shore was a dark line to my left, broken by occasional lights from houses on the cliff. I followed it like a lifeline, counting strokes, counting breaths, trying not to think about what would happen if I tipped over. 30 minutes, maybe 40. Time became strange out there on the water, measured only in the burn of my shoulders and the gradual approach of familiar landmarks. The old lighthouse, the marina where we used to rent boats, the pier near the fish market, and then, finally, my own dock. The one Harold built the summer after we bought the house, cursing at splinters and laughing when I brought him lemonade. I pulled the kayak onto the shore and climbed out on shaking legs. Every part of me hurt, but I was home. The back door was unlocked. I always left it unlocked, much to Thomas's complaints. "What's the point of security, Mom, if you don't use it?" But tonight, my stubbornness saved me. I stepped into my own kitchen. The familiar smell of coffee and lemon polish surrounded me like an embrace. I was here. I was safe. But I wasn't finished. I went straight to the living room, to the small wooden box on the mantel where I kept odds and ends. Inside, buried beneath old photos and spare keys, was my backup phone. A cheap, prepaid thing Harold had insisted I keep charged and hidden. Another redundancy. Another layer of protection from a man who loved me enough to plan for every disaster. I turned it on. The battery showed 67%. Enough. My fingers trembled as I dialed 911. Without my hearing aids, I couldn't hear the operator's voice. So I spoke clearly, slowly, hoping they could understand. "My name is Eleanor Mitchell. I'm at 247 Ocean View Drive. I was held against my will at a beach house by my son Thomas Mitchell and his wife Linda Mitchell.
I'm excited to share this journey
They
with you.
took my hearing aids and
Let's
phone
begin.
and tried to make me sign documents. I escaped. I need police. I gave them every detail I could think of. The address of the beach house, as best I remembered it. The license plate of Thomas's car. The papers he'd tried to make me sign. I spoke for 2 minutes straight, then hung up before they could ask questions I couldn't hear. Then I pressed the locket. Twice. Hold for 3 seconds. Another signal. Another layer of help on the way. I sank into Harold's old armchair, the one that still smelled like him, and waited. They came faster than I expected. Police lights flashed through my windows within 15 minutes. I opened the door to find 2 officers, a man and a woman, their mouths moving with questions I couldn't understand. I pointed to my ears, then grabbed a notepad from the hall table. Hearing aids were taken. "I'm deaf without them. Please write." The female officer nodded, took the pad, and wrote, "Are you Eleanor Mitchell? Are you safe?" I wrote back, "Yes. I escaped from Beach House. Son and daughter-in-law held me there, tried to make me sign over property and accounts." More writing back and forth. They were patient, professional. One officer stayed with me while the other went outside, probably radioing for backup, probably sending someone to the beach house. Then, through the window, I saw Thomas's car screech into my driveway. He came storming up the walk, face flushed, already talking before he reached the door. I couldn't hear him, but I could read his body language. Concerned son mode, worried about his confused mother. Probably already spinning some story about how I wandered off, how I wasn't well, how he was just trying to help. The male officer stepped in front of him, blocking his path. Thomas's expression shifted. Confusion first, then something sharper. His eyes found mine through the doorway. For a moment, we just looked at each other. My son, the stranger he'd become. Linda stayed in the car. Smart woman. She could probably read the situation better than he could. The officers wrote more notes. They asked me to confirm details. They asked if I wanted Thomas removed from the property. I wrote one word, yes. And then, quietly, firmly, they escorted my son away from my home. I watched through the window as they talked to him in the driveway. His arms gestured wildly. His face cycled through emotions, anger, disbelief, desperation. But he got in his car. He drove away. And the officers stayed until they were sure he wasn't coming back. The next few days blurred together. My lawyer arrived the morning after. A sharp-eyed woman named Patricia who'd handled Harold's estate and had been waiting, she told me, for something like this to happen. She'd seen the signs, the unusual requests for account access, the pressure about the house. She'd tried to warn me gently, but some truths need to be learned the hard way. We went through everything. New passwords on every account, fraud alerts at every institution, a restraining order filed against Thomas and Linda, documentation of everything they'd taken, everything they'd tried to do. The police investigation moved forward, too. Turns out the beach house had been rented under a false name. The papers Thomas wanted me to sign would have transferred everything I owned into his control. Everything Harold and I had built together over 50 years of marriage, every dollar we'd saved, the house where we'd raised our children, all of it gone, with one forged signature. But the hardest part wasn't the legal work. The hardest part was my granddaughter. Emma showed up on my doorstep 3 days after everything happened. 17 years old. Her father's eyes, but her grandmother's stubborn chin. She stood there in the morning light, twisting her hands together, looking like she might cry. She wrote on the notepad because she knew I couldn't hear her without my aids. "Grandma, I'm so sorry. I didn't know what they were planning. I swear I didn't know." I pulled her into my arms before she could write another word. We sat together in the kitchen while I made tea. She wrote pages and pages, telling me everything she'd overheard, everything that had made her uncomfortable, everything she hadn't understood until it was too late. Her parents had been careful around her. They knew she would have warned me if she'd known the full truth. "Dad kept saying it was for your own good," she wrote, "that you couldn't take care of yourself anymore. But you're the most capable person I know. You taught me how to balance a checkbook when I was 12. You caught Mom's math errors on her tax return last year. You're not confused. You're sharper than both of them." I smiled and squeezed her hand. "What's going to happen to them?" she wrote. I took a long breath before answering. The district attorney was considering charges: unlawful imprisonment, attempted fraud, elder abuse. Thomas and Linda might face real consequences, might finally have to answer for what they'd done. But Emma was caught in the middle. Her whole world was falling apart because her parents had made choices she had no part in. I wrote carefully, "Whatever happens to them, it doesn't change what happens to you. You're not responsible for their mistakes, and you're not going to suffer for them." Then I told her about the trust. Harold and I had set it up years ago, a small educational fund for each grandchild. But after everything that happened, I'd had Patricia modify it. Emma's portion was protected now, completely separate from anything Thomas could access or influence. It would pay for college, for graduate school, for whatever future she wanted to build. She stared at the paper for a long time. When she looked up, tears were streaming down her face. "You don't have to," she wrote. "I know," I wrote back. "I want to." She hugged me then, tight and fierce, and I felt something loosen in my chest. Something that had been wound too tight for too long. Some things can't be fixed. Thomas and I may never speak again. The son I raised, the boy who used to bring me dandelions from the backyard, that person seems very far away now. I don't know if he's still in there somewhere, buried under years of resentment and entitlement, or if I just never saw him clearly until now. But some things can be rebuilt. New locks on my doors, new systems to protect my accounts, new habits of checking and verifying and trusting my own instincts. And some things were never broken at all. My love for Emma, my memories of Harold, my stubborn, persistent belief that I am not too old to fight for my own life. The hearing aids came back eventually. The police found them in the beach house, along with my phone and wallet, all tucked into a drawer like evidence they expected would never matter. Having sound return was strange at first, almost overwhelming. The world had become so quiet in those days that I'd learned to navigate by feel and sight alone. But I adapted. That's what life is, really. One adaptation after another. Last week, I sat on my back deck, watching the sunset over the water. Emma was inside doing homework at the kitchen table, her laptop open next to a cup of the tea she'd learned to make just the way I like it. She stays with me on weekends now. Her choice, not mine. She says she wants to make sure I'm okay. I think she just wants somewhere that feels safe. Harold's locket hung around my neck, warm from my skin. I opened it sometimes, just to look at the tiny button inside, a reminder that he was still protecting me. Even now, even from wherever he'd gone. The ocean rolled against the shore in its endless rhythm. The same waves, the same salt air, the same stretch of coast I'd loved for 40 years. Nothing had changed out there. Everything had changed in here, but I was still standing, still stubborn, still Eleanor Mitchell, retired teacher, widow, grandmother, survivor. If this story reaches anyone who's being slowly pushed aside by people who should love them, I hope you hear this clearly. Your voice matters. Your instincts matter. The unease you feel when someone explains away your concerns with words like confused and stressed and overwhelmed, that unease is telling you something true. Trust it. Plan for it. And when the moment comes, fight like hell. Because age doesn't make you smaller. It makes you wiser. And wisdom, in the end, is the sharpest weapon of all.